Hello and welcome to the Health Science Podcast, sponsored by the National Health Association. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Satino, and today I'm absolutely delighted to have as my guest Juliette, who I could safely call the caregiver of caregivers, I would say. I mean, when I look at the work that she does, but there's so much to her background in really helping the safety and protection of animals through the years, and a widespread, incredible experience as an Emmy-winning scriptwriter for soap operas. And there's just so many things that I want to talk with you about. So welcome, Juliette. I'm so happy that you're here. Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association, the oldest organization in the world, championing the extraordinary benefits of a whole plant food diet and healthy lifestyle, as well as water-only fasting. We believe that health results from healthful living and focus on evidence-based science that promotes the health of you and your loved ones, as well as the health of all animals and the environment. We feature experts from a cross-section of disciplines within the plant nutrition, vegan, psychological, environmental, and animal compassion sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Satino, the NHA's Director of Health Education.
Thank you, Dr. Sabino. Yes, it is a joy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, there's so many different directions I want to go with you in this conversation. So let me start very simply, because like a good scriptwriter that you are, when I went on to look at your background, you broke your life up into different acts, which I liked a lot, because in your early experience, you had so many different things that were so unique, in the sense that you went from Playboy bunny to a stunt writer in films to being an Emmy award-winning writer. And let me ask you a question. In your own dance, in your own life, I'm sure you don't set out thinking about those kinds of things. How did they evolve in your experience to those different things that you did?
No, I did not. And that's a very, very good question. No, I started off like any normal kid, but my father died when I was 10 years old. And I, of course, was not aware of it because I was so young. But my mother was not mentally right. She was very, very mentally ill. But this is the 60s and in England. And as you probably know, there was very little, nobody said the word mental health unless they were shipping you off to an asylum, for electroshock therapy or something like that. There was no help. So there's my mother left completely helpless. And at 10 years old, I sort of became the adult, and life progressed horribly. Basically, mother was incompetent at doing anything, and she didn't really want me very much. I mean, we were strangers. So as life progressed, it was about survival, really. It was just, I had to survive because I had one incompetent parent. So as we moved through, we ran out of money. That's why I had to go and work at the Playboy Club. I was underage. How do I put this? I redid my birth certificate. And I went to work there, and I worked long, long hours in 4-inch stiletto heels, which, let me tell you, is no fun.
No fun.
And then my mother once again sort of put us into poverty. So we got kicked out of where we lived. I'm sort of squeezing everything in here.
Yeah, no, I get it, yeah.
We were kicked out, and then the only resource we had was a car. So we got in the car and drove to Istanbul, Turkey, because that's where my father was from. And my mother decided we were going home, which was really strange because it wasn't her home anyway. And then it just sort of evolved from there. I couldn't bear being there with her, so I took myself off to Beirut, and it was in 1972 that I took myself to Beirut, just before the civil war there, which I happened to get stuck in. And so it just snowballed from there. I didn't ask for any of it, to answer your question. But, back in those days, life was very, very different. And there was a sense of freedom and that we don't have today. I just said, I'm going to Beirut, and off I went with a few dollars in my pocket. So when I came to America, I came here with $200 and no driving license. Can you imagine? And, I just said, well, what do I need to do to make this work?
Yeah, I remember, I grew up in those same times in the 60s and 70s, and it
Yeah,
was a different time in terms of freedom and autonomy, the way people would just get up and you'd hitchhike across a nation,
yeah,
basically. I mean, you wouldn't even consider doing any of that now. But,
no,
but you're in a way, you're underselling yourself in a certain way, because you didn't just become a writer when you went to writing, you became an Emmy Award winning writer. You
I
didn't just
didn't. Just to correct you, I was nominated.
Well, whatever
Along.
it is, it's
Yes,
still a
yeah,
nomination. I mean, to me,
yeah,
that's still being at that level. Not
yes,
only did you become a pilot, you became an
yes,
ATP pilot, which is the highest
yes,
level of pilot certification that there is, and a
yes.
flight instructor. So you really achieved at a very high level whatever you set out to really do, which is a testimony to, I guess, your stick-to-itiveness. And I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you that because when you went into that piloting, I don't know what the impetus and the motivation was for that. Maybe another way that you saw a certain kind of freedom in flying or whatever, but it led to you being involved with then getting involved with animal protection, animal rights, animal rescue. Tell me about that whole dance, because I found it to be so interesting that you were involved in rescuing over somewhere around 6,000 animals out of
Yes,
Hurricane Katrina in
yes,
your flight experience as a
yes,
transport pilot. Talk
yes.
about that a little bit. I think our
Uh,
audience would be fascinated by that.
yeah, I was a pilot in New Jersey, and that's where I became a pilot and a flight instructor. And we decided that we would move to Utah and work for Best Friends Animal Sanctuary, and they are the largest no-kill animal sanctuary pretty much in the world. And we were there earlier on. We were there in 2003. So my husband and I had my airplane with me. And I would help them out by flying animals around and dropping them off and picking up. And then, of course, Hurricane Katrina hit, and it was all hands on deck, because, as you well know, everybody had to leave their animals behind. And all the people in New Orleans thought they were leaving for a day or two. So a lot of the animals were tied up. A lot of the animals were shut in rooms, and the flood came, and we had to go down and do this massive, massive rescue. A lot of the sanctuary people came down. I mean, it was a multi-people effort. We set up a small sanctuary just outside of New Orleans, just outside of Macomb, Mississippi, and literally the truck would come every night at 1 o'clock in the morning with up to 400 dogs and cats and God knows what
Wow.
else, and drop them off, and we would house them and vet them, and realizing quite late into this. I mean, I went down there in August of 2005, days after the storm hit. And then we suddenly realized about 3 months in, no one was coming for the animals because no one was coming to claim them. I think
Right.
so. During that year that we were down there, we rescued close to 6,000 dogs and cats.
So
Many, many.
they were put in crates and then put on planes and taken to the sanctuaries. Is that what was happening?
No. We that was too many for us.
Yes.
What we did was we organized this big rescue sort of network of other shelters, other no-kill shelters that would basically take some of these animals and adopt them out. We took back to the sanctuary as much as we could, but we tried to take back animals that really, really needed help. That was our speciality, was helping troubled animals. And
Right.
so we took back quite a few, but then we continued. I mean, we continued the work of getting these animals into shelters all over the country. So I, at any given time, had 15 dogs in the back of the airplane. I was flying all over the place with them. I
Well,
also had a family of tarantula spiders that I had to take to tarantula rescue in Alabama. Oh, yes,
wow.
there is one. Yeah.
That is definitely an unknown chapter of that hurricane. Absolutely.
Well,
So
I mean, you'll be amazed at what people keep for pets, especially, down in New Orleans. I mean, we had a boa constrictor that was like 12 feet long. We had all sorts of strange things.
Well, that
But
doesn't surprise me. Recently, I saw a man try to bring on an alligator on a plane as an emotional support animal, which I thought was pushing the envelope. You know what I mean? I think that's pushing the envelope. But that's an unbelievable chapter. That must have been such a rewarding but yet very stressful time to get through all of that. I mean,
yes, it was.
just thinking about the mind-boggling nature of all of that, because now
Yeah.
you're in the middle of this hurricane wrecked area,
Oh,
and now you're landing planes and planes are taking off. And I mean, all of that had to be like
Yeah.
unbelievable stress. And
It was an interesting stress, actually, doctor, because we were in the height of crisis, but we were saving everybody. We were stopping animals dying. We were basically taking them, doing the best we could for them medically, and then taking them to the best possible place. We also adopted out a whole bunch from where we were in New Orleans.
Right.
We adopted out a whole bunch from there. I, of course, came home with 4, needless to say. But yeah, there's a certain feeling when you have a purpose.
Right.
You know, when you have a mission. Anderson Cooper came down with his show at the time and interviewed all of us, and he was just blown away. I mean, because I said it's a mission. We're on a mission, and when you have that purpose in life, there's the stress is, I don't know, it is stressful, but it's not the kind of stress you get like nowadays. You know, wondering what's going to happen to us.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you look at the extension of life, longevity in these blue zone cultures, like in Japan and Okinawa,
Right.
they talk about ikigai, which is that purpose and
Yes.
passion that drives, that really gets you up in the morning, that really
Yes.
gets you motivated, that gets you activated. So in a
Yes.
sense, when you have that, the resilience in handling stress is much stronger because you're
yes.
really coming from this solid base. And that's a great segue for where we're going to go next. I really want to talk about the big missions in your life. I'm here with Juliette Watt, and we're going to take just a very short break to hear from our sponsor, the National Health Association. You're listening to the Health Science Podcast Show. I want to remind you to visit the National Health Association website, where you'll find incredible resources to support your healthy lifestyle, including plant-exclusive eating without added salt, oil, and sugar. Simply go to healthscience.org or nationalhealthassociation.org. Be sure to check out membership, which is only $35 per year for those living within the United States and $55 for those living outside the U.S. You'll be amazed at all the information and benefits you'll receive. As a member, you're kept up to date on the latest evidence-based tools for health promotion. You'll receive the incomparable quarterly magazine, Health Science, a beautiful 40-page advertising-free publication mailed to your home or offices, loaded with articles, recipes, inspirational stories, and interviews with world leaders in the fields of personal health, plant-based nutrition, water-only fasting, animal rights, and environmental support. And you'll receive details about life-changing events, such as the extraordinary annual conference of the National Health Association and diverse opportunities for plant-exclusive NHA cruises and travel vacations to exotic destinations around the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Satino, and now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Health Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Satino, and I'm here today with Juliette Watt. And I want to delve now into what you have talked about as 2 big missions that you've actually articulated, that when I was doing research on you, I found really important. One was to help people that have been, in a sense, have lost themselves in the care and service of others, finding a way to self-actualize and come back to the sense of their self-worth and actualize their dreams and really be able to create and achieve the things that, you know, they would want to achieve in their life. And then also to deal with the dark side of what you and a number of psychologists have addressed as compassion fatigue.
Yes.
So let me go into that a little bit, because when I got into that, it struck. I've done so much research in talking about stress through the years, and I've been a therapist for 45 years.
Yeah.
So it forced me, when I was doing research on what you were talking about, to really look very, very closely at the relationships I've had with my family, with my patients, with the people I've cared for, and how I've cared for myself in the face of that. It really it made me put myself under a microscope, and it brought up some very intriguing things that I want to kind of discuss with you.
Sure.
And when we talk about this, I think when I went back and I looked at the work of Charles Figley and a number of these psychologists going back to like 1995, and they talk about how, you know, when you are caring and observing for people that are dealing with trauma or family members with personal health,
Yes.
there's a part of you that can't help but internalize, of course, what they're going through. There's that
Yeah.
empathy that allows you to identify. But,
Yes.
when we look at caregivers in the stress field, they've always been an interesting model for the
Yes.
negative aspects of stress, because they talk about the chronic caregivers dealing with premature aging, chronic suppression of the immune system, but no one ever put it in the context of compassion fatigue. So I really love the concept. And so I would love for you to share your way of looking at that, your definition of that. And then I want to use that as a jump off for some other discussions that came out of the research that I looked at.
Absolutely. I did a TED talk on compassion fatigue. I don't know. Did you manage to see that at all?
I watched the whole thing. Yes, I did.
And the reason that came about was because somebody actually who asked me if I knew what compassion fatigue was, and I had no idea what it was. And I looked it up, and it was dreadfully familiar what I was reading. And I thought, well, this is very strange. And it was attached to, soldiers and caregivers and
Right.
firefighters. So I actually picked up the phone and called Dr. Figley, and we had a long chat. And I was telling him about my mother and my family. And he said to me, and he's a very typical professor, very, very serious, not laughy and jokey,
Yeah.
And he said to me very straight, he said, "I'm amazed you're still alive." And I started laughing, and he said, no, I'm actually very serious. I'm amazed you're still alive. And I had told him all about my mother, who was
Right.
a narcissist. And she sucked the life of me. She absolutely drained me, because I became the parent, she became the child. Even though there was absolutely nothing wrong with her, she became then the invalid, the one that has this, everything is wrong with me. I'm the victim. Everybody's doing this to me. And my mother basically alienated herself from everybody and attached onto me like a leech for 40 years. And it was making me very ill, because I was constantly, like a soldier on the battlefield, like a caregiver in something like a COVID situation, I was constantly in that high alert survival crisis mode, which of course is pumping these endorphins through your body, which are not good for you, because we're built with the fight or flight for a reason. We're not meant to be in flight the whole time. So what happens when you have compassion fatigue at its zenith, you're heading towards burnout, and you're in that constant state of survival and crisis, which I was. And I started thinking, well, okay, I'm not a soldier, I'm not a nurse, I'm not any of those things. What if there's a whole bunch of women, people out there that have what I have, from caring for a parent or caring for a loved one who is disabled, and you have to do everything. And you basically, as you correctly said, you lose yourself in who you have to become for somebody else. And that's it in a nutshell. And it then becomes secondary post-traumatic disorder.
Right.
Only it's secondary because you are getting it from the other person. I mean, I became like my mother. I became anxious. I became victimized. I started to become her. And it was awful, because it built up in me, as to then when she passed away, I thought, oh, good. I'm done with that. I'm going to be fine. And I wasn't. I crashed, because everything, all the grief, all the trauma of what she had done to me, I had pushed down, must survive, must take care of mother. Of course, when that went away, everything I'd suppressed came up and flooded me. And it was, I have to tell you, doctor, one of the most scariest things I've ever been through. I went running to therapy because I thought I was going to die, and I'm not exaggerating.
Well, fortunately, you found that support, because we'll come back to that, because the strategies for recovering from that are very intriguing, because as you get more and more stuck in the mire of that whole process, you become more and more divorced from the very things you need to do to help yourself. And that is really a remarkable progression into a spiral that's really devastating.
Yeah, I had no self. There was no me at all.
Yeah.
I didn't exist.
It's intriguing because when you look at emergency care workers or doctors or counselors or whatever,
Yeah.
on some level, you can walk away from that. Really, if you really look at it, you can close the door and walk away.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with a child or a parent or someone like that, the
Right.
family tie is a whole different
yeah.
energy, because you really, it's like that old line, the parent is only as happy as its least happy child. There's a part of
Right.
you that is almost identifying with that pain, with that
Yeah.
destruction that's going on. And there's a part of you that doesn't believe you have the right to feel well or to feel good while that person you love is going through that trauma and pain. And that's a really incredible cycle to look at and deal with.
Well,
I dealt with
yeah.
that with one of my sons through an addictive process
Yeah.
where, you know, and it's interesting because when you get to that place where you really feel that there's nothing you can do to make a difference, but you're still being beat up, that is an incredible sense of hopelessness and helplessness, which is one of the real hallmark signs of compassion fatigue when you look at this. So,
But if I may just interrupt you for
please
one
jump in.
second,
Yeah.
the other very, very dangerous side of this is the anger
Right.
that comes in, the anger that you feel at the person you're taking care of, to a point where you stop caring.
Yeah, it dissolves that empathy. It
You
absolutely
don't care.
dissolves
Your
it.
empathy leaves. You
Yes.
wish they would hurry up and die. You lose every empathetic bone in your body, and you are starting to fill up with rage and anger, which, as you well know, you suppress that. What is it called? Depression. It causes
Yes.
the most awful depression and anxiety. And then you're really heading towards burnout. And honestly, I mean, without exaggerating, a lot of people commit suicide because they just can't handle it.
So when people are dealing with a pathology or pain or whatever, it's a very self-centered process, meaning that the whole world seems to be filtered through your own discomfort, your own pathology.
yeah.
So in a sense, you have, in a way, a kind of disregard for anything going on outside of you.
Yes.
And it's kind of intriguing. We could make a simple definition of spirituality that's not religious, but it's something that is more concerned with things outside of you, not just your own personal agenda. So it's kind of the opposite of a kind of a spiritual focus. And it's intriguing that when it's a family member, they, in a sense, especially if it's a mother and a daughter or a father and a son or even a parent and a child, there's this feeling that person has a responsibility to respect that self-centeredness.
Yeah.
And you need to only be breathing for my beck and call, for my whim, for my
That's right.
need. And that's such a difficult thing to break, because when you've been that person that's loved that person your whole life and cared for that person your whole life, there's a lot of work to be able to transcend that, to come to that place. And so it's not an easy path.
No, what made it very difficult was the fact that my mother really didn't love me. She sort of tolerated me. And I have to say, I tolerated her because my father was the bond. My father was the one. And when he was gone, her and I looked at each other and went, oh, well, we're stuck with each other. So my mother then became exactly what you're talking about. The narcissistic, everything is about me, every single thing I did. And with that comes this very frustrating state, because when I felt really bad after she died and I had all this post-traumatic stress on me, what got me out of it was basically getting out there and giving back and doing things. And, you know, Maya Angelou says this wonderful thing: when you're giving, you're living. And my mother, as like a lot of people in that condition, they don't do anything. They suck on you. They won't go and volunteer anywhere. They won't go and help out. I used to try and get her to go down to the local dogs shelter to walk dogs. She wouldn't do that. It was all me, me, me. And it's so hard. It's
impossible. It's just virtually impossible, truthfully. Juliette, at this juncture, let's talk about where people can find you online. What's a good location for you, and anything that you have available, books, tapes, anything that you feel would really highlight what we're talking about and help people dealing with this.
Well, I have a website, which is JulietteWatt.com. I think that's scrolling. And on that website, I have my TED Talk, which is Compassion Fatigue. What is it, and do you have it? I did that in TEDx Fargo in 2018. And from that, I think I have close to 300,000 views, which I'm super happy about, because it means 300,000 people have looked at it and perhaps gone, that's me. I wanted it to really help people.
Right.
That's there. And from that, I do coaching as well for people who do have compassion fatigue, but don't know it. And they're looking after somebody, or they've got themselves into a real mire of this caretaking and they've lost who they are. I do a lot of coaching on that. And also I have a book that came out in April, and it's called In Between the Magic, and it's available on Amazon. And it's basically the first 28 years of my life, which is somewhat exciting and somewhat unbelievable. It's got my mother, of course, throughout, and I wanted it to do two things. I wanted it to be a good read, but I also wanted it to help people understand I was there. I'm an ordinary person. If there's something you have to survive, if there's something that looks impossible, just go do it. You can do it. You can survive. You can take action. You don't have to sit there and be the victim. And I was in Beirut during the war, and I was abducted by an Arab sheikh, and I had a situation in Belgium that was pretty awful, but I caught the guy and put him in prison. And so there's a lot of survival. The book is about survival, but in a way that I was just an ordinary person without any help, without any support, and I did it. And I'm super happy about it because it's made me who I am today. And anytime now, when there's any adversity or anything in my life that, really seems insurmountable, I just say, I can do this. It's not
you
a
can do
problem.
anything. I mean, your message of empowerment is really, it's really how resilience is built. You have to deal with these events, and, as you work with them and heal through them and work with them and transcend them, that's how we build in that sense of self-esteem and self-worth and autonomy and all the things you're talking about. It's interesting. I want to touch base with something, because as I was going through this literature and this experience, I have spent a lot of years in my own life with some addiction in my family, and also as a counselor dealing with a lot of addictive process. It was very intriguing to me how there were so many things within this compassion fatigue mechanism that were very much like addiction. And here's what I mean by that. And see if this resonates with you. We have a simple definition of addiction that goes on in the field of addictionology that talks about the continued or compulsive use of a mood-altering substance or behavior.
Yes.
And here's the kicker: without regard for negative consequences, meaning there's a sense of isolation and denial. And it seemed to me that was coming through what was happening to people oftentimes who are dealing with compassion fatigue.
Yes.
There can be such a denial of the process itself. So it separates you from thinking that maybe there's even a problem, which means that now you're separating yourself from any supportive mechanisms that may help you, and then you self-isolate. And it's intriguing because in the field of addiction, we have this idea that there's a reward deficiency that happens, and then we attempt to self-medicate with the 5 major forms of addiction, which are things like food, sex, drugs, process addictions like work. And with these caregivers and so on, there's that workaholism, there's that work addiction that kind of takes the place sometimes, where you kind of hide out. But in a way, it's actually triggering a chemical reward in some way that's linked to this process of addiction, where the part of the brain that's involved in the addictive process hijacks your command and control centers, so that now you're working on automatic and reactive arousal. And it seemed to be, do you resonate with that?
Yes, I do, because also, and you just made me sort of think about, there's also the fear component. Now, I know a lot of addicts, and there's the fear of being without that which they are addicted to, alcohol or whatever. There's this terror that they're going to be without it, and they will do anything in their power to get it. Well, it's exactly the same as compassion fatigue. There's this addiction to being the martyr, to looking after the person, and the fear of the person you're looking after being angry at you because you haven't done enough. My mother was constantly disappointed in me, which is kind of worse than anger, right? I was always just not quite good enough, and I could have been. What a shame. It was a lot of that, and her anger just was building and building, and mine was building and building.
Right.
And there is this fear and terror. I was so afraid of this little woman, terrified just the same as an addict is afraid of being without their
Right.
drug, alcohol, whatever. So there's another symbiosis right
Yeah.
there. Does that
And
make
actually,
sense?
there's an acronym for relapse and addiction called HALT. And the
Yes.
acronym means that these are the things that if you're not careful, they will trigger relapse. And HALT is hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. So if you think about the anger, the isolation of loneliness, the tiredness with burnout, it was very intriguing to see the similarities of the path of sobriety and the path to recover from
Yes.
compassion fatigue for me. It was kind of a very intriguing piece.
It's,
Now, let me go a step further because, and this is interesting because one of the things that came out of this is that in the strategies for helping yourself or getting help, one is to recognize that empathy is both a skill and a feeling. And the interesting thing is I had to learn through many years of working with people that, you know, you're most effective as a therapist when you absolutely connect and you can resonate and try to kind of identify with what that person is going through. But the question, the conundrum is, how do you do that and keep a kind of emotional boundary and distance that doesn't allow you to internalize that? So you now become as shattered as the person you're working with that secondary trauma and so on. Talk a little bit about the skill and the strategy of how you create that little bit when you're caring for someone. How do you reduce the cost of care by maintaining a little bit of that emotional boundary? I've had to learn how to do it through years of working with people, but but people that are caring for loved ones and so on that are right in the midst of that, what can they do to make that realization of strategy and feeling and how they can create some distance?
It's very, very difficult. I won't deny it, because the most important thing, in my opinion, and is to put yourself first.
Right.
And a lot of people have real problems with that because, as you know, when we were young, we were told not to be selfish, which is the worst thing we could have ever been told, because being selfish is not a bad thing. So I always tell my clients, listen, how do you feel right now? And they tell me the plethora of awful things that they feel. And I go, okay, so what would you like to do today that you would be able to do if your mom or whatever wasn't in the picture? And they've got a litany of things that they would do. So I always say to them, listen, find 1 hour each day where you can either get somebody to sit there, or you just have to get someone. And you can, if you put your mind to it and take the martyrdom of only I can do it off, and go out and do something that you enjoy, even if it's sitting in the park doing nothing, or listening to some music or something. Go for a walk, go visit a friend. You have to get out and you have to put yourself first. You have to say, okay, today I feel tired. I'm exhausted. How can I take some time so that I can rest? You know, how can I not have to get up 3 times in the night because the screaming has started?
Right.
It's mathematics. You just have to say, all right, I've got to put my needs first. So who can I get to help me? And a lot of people, I don't know if you found this, do not reach out for help. I've had a lot of clients that have called me, and after a couple of sessions, I see them spiraling back down again with the yes, but. You know what I mean? That is
You know what? That's what I was just trying to address before. It's almost that feeling, especially if it's a loved one or a family member, where you have this sense that because they're suffering the way they are, you don't have a right to not suffer. You actually should live and stay in that place because you owe that to them to kind of resonate with their pain and dysfunction. And it's an absolute setback to any sense of self-worth and autonomy. I mean, it's amazing.
Because you don't. I mean, let's tell it like it is. They're your parents, okay, or they're your loved ones, or they were, but you don't owe it to anybody. Right. This is not your job. You did not you didn't ask for this job. You're not trained for this job. You're not a psychiatrist. You're not a therapist. You're not a nurse. Right. You don't know how to administer medication. And you didn't ask for this. So you really don't owe them. You are doing it as kindness, as an act of kindness, as an act of courtesy. And a lot of people feel this tremendous sense of duty. I have to because it's my parents. No, you don't. You really don't. Right. And I had that sort of light bulb go off a year before my mother passed. I went, wait a minute. You know, what am I doing? I'm on a Sunday on the phone to the store 2 blocks from where she lives doing her grocery shopping. What the hell am I doing?
Right.
And it was mind-boggling. You know,
Well,
why am I doing it?
it sounds like an oxymoron, but it's the model is like selfish compassion, which is kind of an interesting phrase because it's so
Yeah.
true. And the
Yeah.
other thing the realization that I found myself having to work with as a parent, dealing with some things related to my children,
Right.
was the idea that nothing is really in my control.
Right.
There's this idea that you can control all of this behavior because as a parent,
Right.
you feel the need to protect and to save and to help. And so,
Yeah.
but there's a part of it that you have to have that sense of actually letting go and realizing that this is a separate individual going through whatever the stuff is that they are going through on their path. And you can work as a guide to maybe help provide some information. But the fact of the matter is you can't control it all. And that sense of letting go, to me, was a big part of my own sense of freedom and recovery. And I'm assuming that that's something that a lot of us don't have. We have this feeling that we need to control every
Yes, we do.
aspect of this situation, and you can't.
Yes.
It's not in your control.
Well, they do tend, I mean, they give up the responsibility that they should have for their own life, and they put it in your hands. And all of a sudden, you're responsible for how they feel
Right.
all the time. And you're not. You can't be. But they give up that. They don't take responsibility for anything, nothing at all. All right, maybe they're unwell. Maybe they're physically, unable to do things, but that's not your fault. You didn't make that happen, and they should not. You have to draw a hard line here. They should not make you feel guilty for the way they feel, because that's what they do. That's what my mother did. Well, if you didn't do this, that, and the other, I wouldn't feel this way. Well, that's bullhickey. It's not true. You would feel this way because you want to feel this way, because this is where you feel comfortable. And this is where you have the power to keep me with you. And I know this sounds harsh, doctor, but there is that side of it that's incredibly selfish on their point. In other words, I must be all about me and you have to be all about me.
There's no question. I've seen it repeatedly, and I've seen the pain that it creates because
Right.
the child, let's say this is now you're a grown woman, your mother's maybe in her 80s, you may be in your 50s, and all of a sudden your mother is, chiding you for not being at every beck and call and you're a bad person for not, how could you not, do that for me? And you really have to make the steps that you're talking about, these revitalizing steps of, creating an environment of support, maybe seeking other supportive help like you did with counseling. It was a very strong supportive move for you. Creating that situation where you understand that you're not responsible for where they are. You can care and have compassion for where they are, but you have a life that you're entitled to be living at a high level.
Yeah. And I didn't figure all this out until after she passed away. My therapist here now tells me, gosh, I wish you'd come to me at 18. And I said to her, me too. But, because nowadays you have places to go and you have someone that you can talk about mental health. But I had nowhere to go. Plus, the other thing is a lot of, and I think you'll agree, a lot of caregivers don't know what they're going through because they're in this heightened sense of must do crisis, must take care. Oh, I didn't go shopping for her, I must go shopping. And it's you're in that fight flight mode the entire time.
And that fight or flight mode is what leads to that high level of denial that there's even an issue that you're involved with. It's almost like this is just a natural, like, for example, if I get up every day and I'm in pain, we start to believe that getting up in pain is the way it's supposed to be. Yes. Until you realize when that pain is gone that you have an aha moment. Oh, I don't really need to be in pain because this is not the normal course of events. Yes. In that arousal state that you're talking about, that fight or flight, adrenal, over hyperadrenal state, you're just operating in this reactive mode, and you come to believe that that's just the way it is. Well, when in fact, that's not the way it is.
No, it isn't. And just a quick, my mother had this constant terror of being without money to a point where it was a borderline hysteria. And what were we? Constantly without money. And
Right.
it was as if she manifested this the entire time. When she was older and I was living here in the States, I used to say, get out, go and go somewhere. She said, I can't leave the apartment. I can't do it. And eventually she gets legs that are edemaed. She can't walk. So the universe sort of gave her what she asked for. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I
And
do.
you have to be really careful, because if you're not, you get sucked into that with them.
Right.
And I, to this day, have still got to take a minute, if on the money thing, I have to take a minute and go, I'm not going to be poor. I'm not going to be on the street. That is absolutely impossible. It is logically impossible, but I
Right.
still have it right here inside me from 10 years old. And that's what I try so hard to work with people on. Don't let this take over your life. Don't become their story.
Do you find yourself needing to follow through with any additional therapy now in yourself, or you're not at
Oh,
that point?
no, I go regularly once every 3 weeks, and I
Okay.
will do probably for the rest of my life,
Well,
because yeah.
let me ask you a question, because you're doing a lot of one-on-one counseling too,
Mhm.
as you said, online. So you're in that same dance where now you're dealing with the secondary trauma of the
Yes.
care of the compassionate people, the compassion fatigue people you're working with. So have you gotten really good at creating that boundary for yourself,
Oh,
using that empathy both for skill
absolutely.
and feeling? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I've actually, and I'm proud to say, become very efficient at that, and keeping it in a kindness mode.
Right.
You know what I mean? Not going school teachery about it, and
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
kind with them. And I do a lot of asking questions when they'll go on and on and on. And I go, well, okay, well, how does that make you feel?
Right.
And no one, that's probably a lot of my clients, no one's ever asked them how they feel. And they're like, and they have to really think. And I said, well, what does it make you feel like? How do you feel inside?
Right.
And then the floodgates open, and then we can start getting some work done. So I find that, I don't know if you do that, I find that asking questions so that they can figure out for themselves, oh, right, that makes sense. Okay. And then I go, okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go out and whatever the situation is. And they go, well, I can't do that. And I go, yes, you can. Take 10 minutes, do it. I had a lady that couldn't leave her house. She would not leave her house. And I said, open the front door, stand on the porch today. That's all I want you to do.
So that's a big step. Absolutely. So it's important to realize that small steps lead to big changes over time.
Yeah.
Sometimes we want to shoot for some high ideal of perfection, and then of course we fall short, and then we're off the path. When in fact, making small, consistent changes can
Yes,
link together to lead to something very powerful,
it
and
can.
create a different outcome. That's a very positive outcome.
Yes, and that's what I did in the book. I wanted, and I think I managed it from some reports from people I actually don't know very well. I wanted to illustrate how having a mother like this in such an adverse situation with really no money and no resources and no friends and no help, because there wasn't any, how you can get through, because and how resilient you can become. That's what I really wanted the book In Between the Magic to illustrate. Yes, you can have fun, but understand that you really have to pay attention, that you don't get sucked into the story of this person who has literally attached themselves to you.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense.
Okay.
So, Juliette, as we wind down this interview, you have any final words that you'd like to really share with the people out here, and any feelings you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't actually realize how they feel. I don't think a lot of people actually sit down and go, how do I actually feel? Am I okay with everything that's going on? Am I okay with the people in my life? Am I okay taking care of this person? And just a little moment of self-realization of, is this what I really, really want? What did I want when I was 15? And I'll often ask people this, what was your dream? Because if you have a dream, make it almost impossible to reach. I said, I'm going to do a TED talk, and everyone went, yeah, right, sure. I said, I'm going to do it. I am going to do a TED talk. And there is great power in words. And if you say, I'm going to get out of this situation, if you're in a bad marriage, for instance, or you're in a really bad situation with somebody, it takes such courage, it takes such energy, but you have to do it. And when you do it, you feel such pride for yourself. You feel liberated. I mean, and so many people are afraid. They go, yeah, but I can't do that because she'll be upset with me.
Right.
And that's a very common sentence. Somebody will be upset with me. I'll make someone feel uncomfortable. Rarely do people go, you know what? I need to do this. I'm going to do it kindly and politely. And I am not responsible for the way this person feels.
Well, I want to really thank my special guest, Juliette Watt, today for really sharing a really inspirational message, her life, her heart. And I urge you to follow her on her website, which will be in the show notes, and to go and pick up her book. What's the title again? Say it again, Juliette.
It is In Between the Magic.
In Between the Magic.
Yes, and it's available on Amazon. And it's a good read, folks.
And I urge you to pick it up. I think it's going to be, if you're dealing with anything related to any of this, it's going to transform your life.
Oh,
and I really want to thank my audience out there that have joined us today. Without you, we can't do what we do. Mm-hmm. And I want to thank you for joining this very active, healthy community. And on behalf of the National Health Association, I'm your host, Dr. Frank Satino. And I look forward to being with you on the next episode of the Health Science Podcast. Thank you so much. You've been listening to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association. Thank you for joining us today and for your commitment to evidence-based health science that backs a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle and contributes to the well-being of all people, animals, and our environment. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Satino. Be sure to leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you on the next show.